On paper, the Indian economy is thriving. Official figures show a GDP growth rate of 8.2%, making it the fastest-growing major economy in the entire world. Yet, directly contrasting this narrative of prosperity, Prime Minister Narendra Modi publicly appealed to citizens to stop buying gold for a year. He asked families to reduce cooking oil consumption by 10% and suggested working from home. If an economy is expanding faster than any other, its leadership typically does not ask the public to prepare for wartime-level rationing to preserve foreign currency reserves. Those top-line growth statistics are obscuring a severe structural fracture. While the macro numbers look healthy, a quiet economic collapse is eroding the daily survival of the entire working class. Take Alpesh Bai. Working in Surat's massive diamond hub, his steadily rising salary allowed him to achieve a middle-class milestone, enrolling his daughters in an English medium private school. Then the industry contracted. Alpesh's salary was cut in half before he was laid off entirely. To survive, he pulled his children out of private school and took a grueling job carrying bundles of clothes for a fraction of his previous income. This bar chart isolates employment within India's informal manufacturing sector. It reveals a steep drop from 131.3 million to 128.6 million jobs in a single quarter. That means 2.7 million livelihoods disappeared in 3 months. Alpesh is not an anomaly. Overlaying the official GDP metric clearly shows the divergence. Those 2.7 million jobs vanished exactly when the formal economy reported 7.8% growth. The celebrated economic boom exists strictly on paper for the top tier. Beneath that surface, a silent catastrophe is wiping out the working class's ability to survive. A logical question arises. If so many people are out of work, how are consumer goods like iPhones, cars, and air conditioners still selling so well? The answer isn't rising wealth. When adjusted for inflation, the average salary of a regular worker is actually lower today than it was in 2012. People are earning less true purchasing power than they did a decade ago. This line graph tracks Indian household debt. By early 2025, borrowing to cover basic living expenses pushed household debt past 41.3% of the GDP. Citizens are funding their daily lives entirely through credit cards and personal loans. Because private consumption drives 60% of India's GDP, this unsecured credit bubble is doing all the heavy lifting. The economy is moving, but the population has zero financial buffer left to absorb an external shock. The first external blow hit when the United States imposed heavy tariffs on Indian exports. This crushed manufacturing hubs, putting hundreds of thousands of jobs at immediate risk in places like the garment export center of Tirupur. Next, political pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump forced the Indian government to halt its imports of heavily discounted Russian oil. Severing that supply meant India had to buy more expensive energy and goods from the U.S. Those transactions require U.S. dollars, rapidly draining the country's foreign exchange reserves. Then, war in the Middle East blocked the Strait of Hormuz. India's backup oil supply was cut off, and the cost of essential agricultural fertilizers skyrocketed. Sensing the instability, foreign investors initiated a massive exit. In just 6 months, they pulled 2.7 trillion rupees out of the Indian market.
Trade wars, a forced reliance on the dollar, and broken supply chains converged at once. This perfect storm cracked India's fragile, debt-fueled domestic market wide open. These supply chain disruptions hit households immediately. When the Strait of Hormuz was blocked, domestic LPG cooking cylinders disappeared from standard suppliers, driving black market prices to double or triple their normal rate. The government maintains a general inflation rate of roughly 4%. The BOT figure is a broad average that includes luxury goods and electronics. It doesn't reflect the 25% surge in wholesale fuel and power, which hits the production of every basic necessity. For a low-income family, survival isn't a broad basket of goods. It is almost entirely food and fuel. When a cooking cylinder that cost 950 rupees suddenly sells for 5,000 in the black market, it consumes half a monthly salary. For these households, the weighted cost of staying alive has spiked closer to 60%. Meanwhile, the Indian rupee fell to an all-time low. Since India imports the vast majority of its crude oil and machinery, A weak currency makes every vital import exponentially more expensive. Everyday citizens are caught in a closing vice. Real wages are shrinking, living costs are exploding, and the national currency is rapidly losing its purchasing power. During severe economic contractions, a national government typically opens its treasury, injecting capital into failing industries to save jobs and stabilize prices. Why isn't that happening here? The state treasury is empty. This area chart maps the government's debt, expanding aggressively from 62 trillion to over 197 trillion rupees today. Now observe the red 40% safety limit for developing nations. India's debt to GDP ratio has breached 82%, double the recommended borrowing limit. This leaves almost no available cash flow. More than 80% of federal revenue is instantly absorbed by mandatory expenses, paying the interest on old loans, maintaining pensions, and funding state salaries. Top banking leaders recognize that the state lacks the capital to intervene. Financial executives like Uday Kotak publicly advised citizens that they must personally prepare for the worst. The sovereign government is trapped in the exact same cycle as its citizens. Overwhelmed by debt and paralyzed by interest payments, it lacks the financial resources to invest in its own survival. The pressures on the workforce are only accelerating. Industry projections warn that AI and automation could soon eliminate hundreds of thousands of formal white-collar jobs in the IT sector. Simultaneously, a historically severe El Niño weather pattern is developing, threatening to devastate agriculture, wipe out rural employment, and push food supplies to the brink. Faced with these compounding realities, leadership has quietly discarded past promises. The publicized deadline to reach a $5 trillion economy by 2022 and then 2025 has now been pushed decades away to 2047. A healthy economy is not defined by a solitary GDP metric on a spreadsheet. It is measured by the tangible purchasing power, job security, and financial resilience of its people. India's paper boom obscured a fragile foundation that is now breaking under the strain. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Concept Corner for more educational documentaries, book summaries, business insights, finance, science, and self-improvement content.